Okay, and welcome to week 3 of our biomedical treatments for autism. Thank you to Dr. Sonya Doherty from the Natural Care Clinic in Burlington for going out of her way, giving us three sessions, and I hope it's been helpful. I was in and out last week just because we had a seminar also going on in center at the same time. But this week I'm here, and hopefully maybe this evening we might even have a guest. So with that, Dr. Doherty, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thank you so much again for having me out. It's such a nice opportunity to chat with families about the medical aspects of autism. So if you do have questions, let's put them into the chat. I think last time we got into some more specific questions, and I think that was a great addition to what we were talking about. So don't hesitate, but I do want to kind of go through. I didn't really play this from the start because I wanted to give you an overview of the most sort of, I would say, the most important medical issues that we see in autism. But let's see here, there we go. So the theory and treatment I'm big on, and I think it's because when we look at autism, I think it's so poorly understood. I think from a medical perspective, autism really presents as a disorder of praxis, and praxis is this, old Greek Latin word for movement. And everything we do requires movement. Talking, visual processing, our intestines moving, our heart beating, our whole body runs on this idea of praxis. And the other term that we use is motor planning. Praxis is a combination between making the motor plan and executing it. So if I'm going to get up from my chair and I'm going to go grab something, I need to put essentially a draft plan together of all the muscular movements that I need to engage in sequentially. So my muscles need to fire at the right time in the right order for me to execute those motor movements. And that's the same thing for talking, forming sentences, words. These motor plans then have to go to the sensory system to be okayed. And the motor plans are long, they're 40, 50, 60, 200 individual movements that have to fire at the right time. So before those movements even take place, the motor plan has to go to the sensory system to be okayed. And the sensory system, as we know in autism, 90% of kids with autism have sensory issues. And so this creates a disorder of praxis. It interferes with motor planning, it interferes with movement, it interferes with communicating, it interferes with eye contact, it interferes with processing visual information. And like I said, interferes with gross motor skills, jumping, running, crawling, and even the way that our intestines function. So mitochondria are at the root of this, and the medical literature in autism is actually quite clear. Mitochondrial impairment is a hallmark of autism, meaning that all children with autism have mitochondrial impairment. They do not produce enough energy to support praxis, to support motor planning, to support movement. So all speech delay is mitochondrial, all visual processing issues with eye contact are mitochondrial. All regression is mitochondrial. And once we sort of understand this, then I think it's very exciting because mitochondrial medicine is very straightforward. Mitochondrial impairment is not the same as mitochondrial disease, but I will give you the example of mitochondrial disease. Some children who are born with diseased mitochondria, they're severely physically disabled, they're severely developmental delayed, and their lifespan is shortened. Their mitochondrial disease is treated with high-dose cocktails of vitamins. And so there already exists in medicine, in fact, in a super specialty of medicine, which is metabolics, those very young children are put on high-dose vitamin cocktails to improve mitochondrial production of ATP. And ATP is like currency. Nothing happens without money, nothing happens without without ATP. The energy in our body, ATP, drives all of development. And so all developmental delay is actually related to mitochondrial weakness. And so just think of this like on a macro scale and then on a micro scale. So let's say someone has pre-existing mitochondrial weakness, which is really easy to have. And unfortunately, as moms, we pass our mitochondrial genetics onto our children. It is not passed paternally, which is actually quite interesting. And mitochondria have their own DNA, and they're extremely sensitive to toxicity. So when you look at the average baby born in North America has about 200 different chemicals in their cord blood. The average adult has about 700 chemicals in their body, in their cells. And so it's really easy to disrupt mitochondrial production of energy. So this is a deficiency syndrome, which we can then support through medical intervention. And medical intervention for improving mitochondrial function is used for mitochondrial disease, like I mentioned. It's also used routinely in our elite athletes. Elite athletes are always leveraging mitochondrial treatments to improve the production of ATP. And actually, we were just talking about the devastating effects of long COVID. Long COVID treatments are also based in mitochondrial supports, things like CoQ10 or PQQ or acetyl L-carnitine, high dose fish oils, and that's just to name a few. The energy production in our bodies is critical to optimizing brain development. And not just when we think about these sort of fine motor skills, as a reminder, our eyes and our mouth are the finest fine motor skills that we have, but our brain needs a ton of ATP to function. In fact, when we think about the brain, we typically think, most people think that the brain is filled with neurons, and neurons are kind of like a cord where, information travels along it. And there are lots of neurons in the brain, but actually only 15% of the brain is neurons. 85% of the brain is an immune system, and it runs on ATP. It broadcasts actually much more like your cell phone, like a Wi-Fi signal. And so children with autism are literally impaired when it comes to communicating with their own brain. And when we do have, or when I've had teenagers or adolescents who communicate, say, off a letterboard, or, they can type what they're feeling, they'll say, I have no control over my body. I don't know how you control your body. I don't know how you move your mouth. And this really goes back to this being a disorder of praxis, of motor planning, of impaired mitochondrial production of ATP. There's some interesting research in here, and I think I might have touched on it, but I did speak with a family in Nigeria this week, and there's a drug for trypanosomiasis that's used in different parts of the world, and it's called Suramin. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but Suramin has been used to actually stop autistic symptoms entirely. And so there was a lot of interest in this drug, obviously because of the profound impact it had on autistic symptoms, but also because of the mechanism. The mechanism had a lot to do with mitochondria. When mitochondria are damaged, they actually send out this danger response. They call it a cell danger response. It's basically like an alarm. And of course, when the alarm is going off in the body, everything changes. Everything is less efficient. We've got more inflammation. We've got slowdown. And this is part of what they've discovered that's happening inside the cells in autism. And so this drug actually stopped the cell danger response, interrupted the alarm, and lo and behold, the autism symptoms dramatically improved, like disappeared. And so when we look at mitochondrial treatment, this relates right back to the cell membrane. So the cell membrane and the mitochondria work together very closely. And if there's damage, there's basically like a screaming or an alert that goes on in the system, and it disrupts people's ability to make these motor plans. If you do talk to kids, teenagers, adults with autism, particularly the non-speaking group, if they can communicate with you off a letterboard, they will tell you they can't control their body. I've had kids basically, tell their parents that even their obsessions, the things that they get stuck on, whether it's watching Thomas the Train or being obsessed with a certain toy, that is even something they can't control. And so it becomes, for me, really important to talk to families about medically giving children back the ability to control their own bodies, control their eyes for eye contact and for visual processing, control their mouth for communication, and certainly to control their body for things like stimming, and control their brain for things that are potentially more obsessive. So I do have a question in here. Let me just, okay. Yeah, well, yeah, and honestly, feel free to jump in. I mean, we've got a really lovely small group here, and I think, I think discussion is very fruitful. You guys have your own experiences, you've got your own feedback from your kids or your own observations. And, I think that it's got to feel pretty awful to not be able to stop certain things. I think it's exhausting to my husband's pretty OCD. It's not, and when I think about OCD, I think it's like it's uncomfortable, right? He doesn't want the house clean; he has to have it clean. And poor guy, he lives with the three of us, and we've got three with ADHD, one with autism and ADHD. So he doesn't stand a chance in terms of keeping the house clean. But it does really stress them out, and that's, I think, on a massive level, maybe a trillion times harder for a person with autism, where they really literally can't control. Yeah, for sure. I think stress does change. We know that stress during pregnancy does increase risk of having developmental delays. Stress changes the way that the cell membrane, and actually maybe I'll just move forward here because I have a really nice picture of the cell membrane, and it was not my intention to go through every single slide here, but I do like just that beginning because that is my philosophy of treatment, and it really is at its core to improve quality of life.
While you're looking there, Dr. Sonya, my son Anthony has really only gotten some full on comprehensional speech and expressive language just in the last couple of years. And it's only in the past year at age 14 that he's now able to tell me I can't stop. Right. So we were just now getting the full verbiage, like words coming out of his mouth, being able to tell us. But it took us 14 years to figure that out. Right. So there's a lot of merit to what she's saying.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think it's got to feel awful to have that lack of control over your system, over your body, in lots of different areas. And to give children more and more control, we have to heal the cell membrane. And so you do that through methylation. We covered that in the first video. I will go over that briefly as it relates to the mitochondria. Methylation makes the cell membrane. And so methylation impairments result in cell membrane weakness. And then methylation also repairs the cell membrane if it's been damaged. And the cell membrane can actually be damaged by toxins. It can be damaged by trauma, microbes, and that will actually change the cell membrane and it will become more rigid. So it's supposed to be really fluid and really flexible. It will change and it will become very rigid. And then you can't get things in and out very easily. One of the examples, again, Robin and I were talking about is carnitine. Carnitine shuttles fats into the cell. So just imagine that this little channel protein here, and it doesn't say carnitine, but it very well could be. Carnitine allows healthy fats like omega-3s from fish oil and omega-6 from things like nuts and seeds and plants to get into the cell so your body can actually make energy. When the cell membrane is damaged and it's in panic mode, you can't get fat inside the cell. And that's why fat deficiency is also a hallmark of autism. When you are deficient in good fats, the inflammation starts to build. And that is why we have brain inflammation in autism. So to start to reverse this problem, we provide lots of healthy fat. We provide lots of methylation support. So methylation will make carnitine. We can also supply carnitine itself. These membranes need omega-3s, they need omega-6s, they really do need a lot of support from methylation. So things like methyl B12 or dimethylglycine, choline, which we can supplement or you can get from things like egg yolk. And a lot of what we're trying to achieve in autism treatment is to settle the cell membrane down, protect the mitochondria, and allow the mitochondria to then produce more ATP. And this relates into the gut. Again, we did talk about this, but as you look at the mitochondrial lens, we looked through the methylation lens. Last time we looked through the visual processing lens, and they are all really connected. But if you look at the gut motility, the way that the gut has to move, the peristalsis, almost like a conveyor belt, that movement is disrupted in autism. And so the gut doesn't move very effectively. You get pockets of old stool that stay there and then stick to the gut wall. That will impair absorption, leading to further deficiencies of things like fat and B12 and other vitamins. You also have this issue of tone, which is pervasive in autism. Low tone leads to really weak muscles, including the muscles of the intestine. And so this is a picture of the large intestine. The large intestine is an upside down U, And on this side, it's the right side. This is the ascending colon. So this part of the digestive tract has to push stool up, and that requires ATP. So in a situation where there's low tone impaired mitochondrial function, you're going to get clogging in this system. And then you can see here at number 11, this then backs into the small intestine. And that's where you'll get a lot of goo and sticky, gooey stuff stuck to the gut wall in the small intestine, leading to a lot of the behaviors that we talked about in the first video. And I am going to pull those back up. I think those are really important. They're really important actually as a starting point, because once the gut becomes full, we need to flush it, and we need to flush it properly and aggressively so that you can clear out the old junk. I have drawn this picture obviously, but the stool sticks in there, and it will literally stick in there till you flush it out. I have a young man who years ago, he developed aggression somewhat out of the blue, just a really calm kid, a child with lots of communication, lots of ability to learn, diagnosed with autism and ADHD, but really not significant behaviors. All of a sudden, behaviors came to the forefront. Parents were actually worried about bipolar. They were working with some healthcare professionals like doctors who were going to diagnose and put this child on pretty heavy duty medication. So they called me and I said, it's going to sound crazy, but get a bowel x-ray. And we'd worked with this family for a while, so we'd built some trust. They went, got a bowel x-ray, and the child was full. The digestive tract was totally full. So then they flushed it out using laxatives over the course of about 6 months, and the baby behavior would still come back if they didn't do the laxatives. So the parents became concerned there was something else going on and had the child scoped with a colonoscopy. And they did find something else was going on, which is also quite common in our kids. So the colonoscopy, as you probably know, you empty the bowel with laxatives for a day or two, and then the doctor will sedate the child typically and look into the rectum with a camera. And the camera, I think, only goes to about here, but there was still stool in the digestive tract for this child, and the doctor ended up having to suck the stool off the gut wall. So the stool is stuck in there. It's really stuck. It's biofilm. Biofilm is like what's in your sinuses when you have a sinus infection, and that will stick to the gut wall. That's why it's so hard to get out, and that's why it causes such significant nutrient deficiencies. I don't know what your kids look like, but a lot of the kids I work with are really lean. They're really skinny. It's hard for them to put on weight. They do not absorb fat well. They do not transport fat well from outside of the cell into the cell. And they don't make energy, ATP, from the fat very efficiently. And some of that can be genetic. Some of it can be epigenetic. So basically, if my great-grandmother was exposed to cigarette smoke or mercury, her genes would be passed on, and her genes would be damaged, and those damaged genes would be passed on to my mom or my great-grandmother to grandmother to mother. And so epigenetics is the generational impact of toxins. And then with genes, that's individual you. Epigenetics, that's your history, and then your exposures to things like microbes and heavy metals. And so all of these actually coalesce into a sticky biofilm that sticks to the gut wall. If your child has elevated heavy metals or elevated microbes, they have found each other and they have stuck to the gut wall in this way. So when that happens, and I did pull this paper up, I believe probably in both the first and second, but I'd like to pull it up again. These symptoms are telling you that that area has become clogged. So when I show you that picture and it's got the stool stuck to the gut wall, this is the presentation that you'll see with kids. So they sometimes they tick, they swallow these big, gulps for no reason. They cry for no reason. They groan and they moan and they whine. They grind their teeth, sometimes to the point of damaging the teeth. They constantly want to eat or drink. They're putting stuff in their mouth. They're chewing. They'll press their belly on furniture or lay on the ground. I think I mentioned this too. Sometimes they will, do a lot of stuff with their private area that can be very disconcerting for families. Aggression, self-injury, these sleep issues. A lot of parents, they've tried melatonin, magnesium, they've tried herbs, they've tried sleep schedules, and nothing's working because it is actually that the gut is full. So the question is, do you do any sort of detoxing in addition to colon cleansing? So it's a great question. The issue with cleaning out the gut is that if you detoxify into the gut and it's full, you're typically going to have worsening of behaviors. And when I first started practicing, it was actually a lot easier to treat a lot of kids. There was certainly lots of tough cases, but with each generation, it seems like kids are getting tougher to treat. And I think that what's happening is there's more and more biofilm in the intestine. And so if you're going to detox heavy metals, and the heavy metals are in the biofilm, in the sticky mucus, then the best strategy really is to flush it. You can use, anything from herbs like, milk thistle or rosemary or, dandelion. There's all kinds of things that you can use to help facilitate detoxification. But keep in mind that methylation also governs here, I'm going to show you this. Keep in mind that methylation also governs detoxification. So one of the things that the methylation cycle makes is glutathione. So glutathione is the most important antioxidant for detoxification. It is the master antioxidant, and it gets rid of pesticides, heavy metals, chemicals, hormones within our body, hormone-like substances that are outside our body. So in autism, 80% of the glutathione is depleted. So we have to replenish the glutathione through the methylation cycle in order to really properly detoxify. If you have mold, you need to detoxify with glutathione. If you have yeast, you need to detoxify with glutathione. Same thing with lead, mercury, pesticides, fire retardants. All of it comes out through glutathione. And so these first few stages of treatment really are critical. And when we look at this, I think I played around too much with this the last time. Now it's sort of a akimbo. Is that the word I'm looking for? But the diet has to be in place to actually properly detoxify. So if you look at this X I'm putting onto the folate cycle, if your child is eating synthetic folic acid, that pink wheel, that folate cycle is not moving very well. This cycle, which is the B12 cycle, is not going to move well. And then you're going to end up with glutathione deficiency. So you have to actually repair that, right? So take out the grains, add the B12, add B6 in here, start replenishing the glutathione, because otherwise you can't get the stress in the brain to calm down. The other thing about something like cod liver oil or high dose omega-3s, maybe even in combination with something like carnitine, is that it acts as an anti-inflammatory, but it also binds toxins. So for every toxin that we have, the fat actually wraps that up to protect our body. It's another reason why our kids are so lean. Now they can have weight on. Keep in mind that weight regulation can go both ways. You can be really lean or you can have a lot of weight on. It's the same mechanism. But most of the kids tend to be lean, and it's really tough to get them absorbing. It's tough to get enough fat because there are so many things depleting the fat within their system. So when I talk about microglial activation, this goes back to that, the brain is 85% immune system. It's only 15% neurons. And this microglial activation is when the immune system in the brain has gone haywire, basically. And so the immune system in the brain gets excited, it turns on, it starts pumping out glutamate, and the brain gets more and more and more stressed. And that's, when you talk to people with autism, again, they'll say, my mind never stops racing. I can hear a fire truck 15 minutes before anyone else can hear it. They cover their ears, they cover their eyes, their brain is overwhelmed because glutamate is an excitable brain chemical. So if glutamate is if it's too high in the brain, then you're going to get a very excited, exaggerated response to stimuli. And so B12, B6, removing the grains and getting enough fat in starts to calm this system. The brain also needs to have this immune system working properly to clean itself up. This brings me actually to one of the foundational interventions that I haven't really touched on, but is sleep. So when you look at the role of methylation makes serotonin and serotonin makes melatonin. and lots and lots and lots of our kiddos do not sleep well. And that has many, many ripple effects, but one of them is in the actual brain's ability to clean itself. I mean, the brain has a lymphatic system. It's called the glymphatic system, and it actually activates at night while kids are sleeping, while everyone's sleeping. And so when children aren't going to sleep in their age, their preferred age window, it actually impairs their ability to clean their own brain. And that is one of the reasons why the brain is inflamed. It's inflamed, and then they can't clean it up. And then because they can't clean up, the inflammation gets more and more inflamed. And this is a very vicious cycle that it is essential to get kids out of. So I'm going to show you this sleep chart. Let's see here. So take a look at this sleep chart here. I know it's a little bit blurry, but this is the ideal for when kids should be going to sleep. So if they're under 5 and they nap, they still would be like a 5-year-old. And so you look at the time they wake up in the morning, and then you look at the time they should be going to sleep. And so how many of you have kids going to sleep within that age window? No. Well, definitely one of the things that happens, 9:30. Let's see here. The earlier your child goes to sleep, the better. Each hour of sleep is actually worth 2 for cleaning the brain. So I think Robin sort of mentioned, I do have someone who wanted to jump on and share some info with you. I just have to send the link to her, because I think I sent the link from the first week, and I'm not sure that's working.
No, it isn't working. If you want to just send me her number just privately here in the chat, I can text her the link quick.
Okay, 1 second here. Okay. I'm sending it. Here we go. And so hopefully, what I'm hoping to share here is that everything is really, really connected, and it's all pretty complicated. But with the starting point that I've discussed with you, which is paleo diet, B12 injections, cod liver oil, these actually help 200 pathways downstream. So if you can get those really strong basics in place, you're going to improve serotonin production, which will improve melatonin production, which helps with sleep. You're going to improve glutathione, which reduces the glutamate, which is what stresses out the brain. You're going to increase glutathione, which helps with detoxification. And when you support methylation, you're also helping the body make cell membranes and repair cell membranes. You're also helping to protect the mitochondria and improving the production of ATP. And so that's why I think that these treatments are foundational. I think that people will come to us and they'll say, well, we've tried this, we've tried this. Sometimes you've tried the right treatment at the wrong time. Sometimes you've tried the right treatment, but not in conjunction with other treatments that are really needed. B12 would be a great example of that. I've had lots of parents to say, oh, we tried the injections and they didn't work, but they weren't on a paleo diet. So keep in mind that these work together like a bicycle, right? So we've got one wheel that needs B12. We've got one wheel that needs the kids to come off grains. And once you do that, the bicycle will start moving forward. So I'm going to look in the chat here and see. So adults can take cod liver oil, but if you're of childbearing age, it's important not to take too much cod liver oil. Anyone who can get pregnant should not take too much. Even if you're not planning pregnancy, it's not my favorite conversation, particularly when I have like a 14-year-old girl I'm talking to. But if you are able to get pregnant, you have to be careful with your cod liver oil. If you're a kid, you can take lots. If you're not past the point of having kids, you can take a lot. So cod liver oil brands, NFH is the best brand in Canada, in my opinion, because they have the highest amount of vitamin A per teaspoon. Other good brands include Genestra, Pure Encapsulations, and Metagenics. Garden of Life is pretty good, but they have much lower levels of vitamin A. They've also all been purchased by Nestle. So lots of naturopaths are sort of trying to find sources that are not just based in the companies that are owned by Nestle. I think that's just the concern about what happens when a bigger company takes over smaller nutraceutical companies. So here's a comment about weight gain. Absolutely. Lots of our kids, they don't gain weight, they don't gain height, and because they're not absorbing. So fat is essential to autism treatment, and making sure a child can absorb fat starts with looking at the gut. You also need to be able to transport that fat into the cell, which requires either B12 or carnitine or both. Chris and I actually, my sister and I actually had a case maybe a month ago where the child hadn't grown, at least in that period of time, hadn't gained weight in at least a year, if not more. And then we put her on carnitine after her gut was better, and she did. She gained weight for the first time. So I did.
I don't know if you saw Carissa join us there.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say I asked my sister to join because one of the things that my mentor, Julie Buckley, she's a pediatrician down in Florida, she said, and she's really just a wonderful human being. She's like, make sure whenever you have the opportunity, you're talking to parents about parent care. This is a long journey. There's a lot of pressure on parents. There's a lot of stress on parents. And so I asked my sister to jump on because she's a naturopath. She's been practicing just a little bit longer than I have. And she owns our clinic in Burlington. So I always say she's my forever boss. And she's amazing. So I think I was going to have you on to see if you could answer some of the questions maybe about adult health.
On it.
Yeah. Sonya,
I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because, this is quite the topic for Chris and I.
Sonya's good at everything, and then she doesn't have any tolerance for hormones. She's like, are they over 10 or 15? Yeah, no, I'm good.
I'm not good at hormones. I'm not as good at hormones, but methylation still is really involved in hormones, and so are fats. And so Krista and I went to China, 4 or 5 times before the pandemic, and Krista was training fertility docs in China. And so I would sit through her lectures, and I really tried to learn more. And so, yeah, I'm decent, but I thought it would be nice to have the expert out.
The question there is from SNPs and B12 injections. I can kind of go through how I see the world with hormones with methylation.
With SNAPs?
SNAPs.
When we were in China, the PhD we were working with called them SNAPs. That plus the sleep deprivation was quite the giggle, but
yeah. And the time is so strange. I know. I love this chart because it looks at Sonya's circles, but it looks at it in the guise of hormones. So estrogen's here, right here. This is like if most of I don't know if I'm assuming most of these viewers are moms, but there's estrogen, there's testosterone. It's I don't know if you know, but like testosterone actually comes from estrogen. So even men will, as women will make testosterone as on the way of making estrogen, but we always make it from the base cholesterol. And the pink area is your stress area. So the cortisol will convert into these hormones, pregnenolone and progesterone, and actually make cortisol, which isn't listed here. So cortisol is your stress hormone. It's not a bad thing. Too much is bad, too little is bad. And then the rest of it splits 2 ways. And one is a precursor for testosterone, and one sort of shifts more into the estrogen phase. But these little boxes here are all SNPs. So the conversion happens in the liver, and the hormones convert into each other. They flow into each other. And sometimes you can tell if you're tipped one way or the other because of your genetics, your SNPs. So that's, when Sonya looks at the brain and the methylation and the mitochondria and the tissue, with adults, you can actually convert it to actual data when you're looking at the hormone piece. But we don't have that option for little ones because they're just not making hormones in the robust way.
But we can look at their cholesterol, which you taught me, and that's really fascinating too. When you look at, parents will say, "Oh, my child's always low in vitamin D," and then you think, well, Canadians are often low in vitamin D, but the other reason is that they're actually low in fat. And so when you run their cholesterol, it's low normal, and you actually realize they don't have the building blocks to even make vitamin D. And then of course the brain's going to be starving for fat. So.
And then what isn't on this chart, which is what Sonya's talking about, is cholesterol actually is the only way you make vitamin D. So cholesterol converts into vitamin D right here, and then cholesterol converts into this pathway. Cholesterol also makes cell membranes. It's important with bile acids and mitochondria and cell function. So a lot of the people we see with SNPs that aren't working as well as they should would have low cholesterol instead of, say, high cholesterol, but you actually use the 3 cholesterol markers to use the idea of good triglycerides, LDL, which we lovingly call bad cholesterol, but we need good stuff to make this chart flow, and then HDL, which we lovingly call good. So if you get enough data, you can actually fill the chart and see which way you're tipping. But I like the numbers. Sometimes Sonya says I like the numbers more than I like people, but I like people too. I just like the numbers.
Well, you've decided to use this data and to use it as a living, working piece of information. So she runs the same types of blood work on everyone, and then she's been able to pick up information that other people have never even thought of. And so that's, what she taught me in China, because when we were in China, they use blood tests as outcome measures. And it was really, really fascinating. Like yeast depletes biotin, and then you can't make cholesterol. So then when we'd have a case with yeast, then we would be following and tracking their cholesterol. So yeah, it's very fascinating. I'm still working on it. I don't know if I'm ready to tackle the hormone piece, but COMT is interesting. You should talk about COMT.
Yeah. And so the other one I was going to talk about,
oh, you do whatever you want. I'll stop bossing you around.
No. I was going to say, I forgot. But so yeah, oh yeah, that's the thing. So someone was asking about B12. Is there like a SNP that doesn't work for B12? So cholesterol is predictable. If you have low cholesterol, you can predictably make it through omega-3s and B12. And you combine those two together and you'll get good cholesterol every time. So it's the way we flush more good power down the pathways. And in life, unfortunately, you can only succeed. You can't sort of partially succeed in life and in the biochemistry of the body. You can get the needs met, or you can make inflammation. So with hormones, it looks like there's only a couple of hormones here, but in actual fact, there's hundreds of estrogens, hundreds of different types of estrogens. And if the body can't make the good stuff, it will make the bad stuff, because those hormones are fat soluble. They stay around the body for longer. They're harder to break down. They put you a bit more at risk, but they're also kind of more stable in the body. They stay in the body longer. So you always want to make good, strong hormones and then break them down. So that was that piece.
And when you don't, you get things like PCOS, or you get
fibrocystic breast, endometriosis, fibroids in the uterus, or like weight gain can also be inefficient hormones just binding in the system, or really aggressive menstrual cycles, or hot flashes, or anytime you're having hormone issues, it's usually because you're making high hormone function or low hormone function, and you're making bad hormones as a byproduct. So with the first question was back, like are there SNPs you can't use B12 injections in? If you need more cholesterol, you have to use B12 to do it, or methylation agents. It's the only way you do it. It doesn't really matter what your SNPs are.
Well, and I think that question often comes with COMT, like parents who have a COMT SNP are 4.7 times more likely to have a child with autism. So then one of the questions people will often ask is, can you use methyl B12? And it's like, well, you can, but you have to work with the whole SNP profile. And so I love this. I can send this to you if I haven't, Robin, but these are SNPs, the little bubbles. And then in green, it shows you what the cofactor is. And purple, it tells you what decreases the function of the SNP. And then yellow, orange, whatever increases the function of the SNP. And SNPs are like enzymes, right? Like the bridges I think I talked about last time. And so if you have a problem with COMT, it is important to get all the cofactors. And I think that's why people sometimes will get on methyl B12 and then they'll kind of go crazy or whatever, because you're stuck here. But if you don't have the right supports, SAMe is, remember that the methylation cycle, the pink wheel gives the methyl donor to the green wheel, and then that gives everything to SAMe. That's like the delivery trucks. So S-adenyl methionine right here, SAMe, you need this to run your methylation cycle. And so there's a lot of ways that you can give a person with COMT methyl B12 and they won't react poorly. And, COMT creates a lot of oxidative stress in the brain. So Chris is talking about it from a hormone perspective. But this is what we do when we get SNPs. We pull your SNPs up and we say, okay, well, where would you be jammed? Where's the bottleneck? So I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that, Krista.
I'm just writing standard labs you can do for adults in the chat bubble, which is a little bit about what we were talking about when you're talking about how can you tell where you are on this pathway. So I'll just put them all down, and then you have to run this blood work fasting, at least 6 hours fasting in the morning from 7 to 9 a.m. Just miss breakfast. It has to be in the morning if you're looking for cortisol numbers. So when I'm gonna kick you out again one time.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
So when Sonya's
I asked you to come on.
I'm taking over.
What else is new?
So if we're looking at the COMT pathway that Sonya's just talking about, is you need it to break down. This is your estrogen good chain. This is when estrogen makes good choices but detoxifies, and then this is when estrogen makes some bad choices, and it still is, it makes more inflammatory estrogens, but it still needs to be detoxified. That COMT pathway is really involved. So people who are born with a genetic COMT pathway inefficiency will need more help detoxifying their hormones. The more you make, the more you have to detoxify. If your body doesn't get rid of them, it'll actually stop making them because it knows you can't handle them, which means it will probably make some bad choices when it goes to flood your body with hormones again, because it'll say, well, that pathway she can't do well, so then I'm going to have to just store it into inefficient hormones that may go 3 months. Usually you make estrogen, you break it down, and that's kind of the way it goes. But you don't want to be making bad choices just because deficiency, because that's treatable.
Other questions coming in. So,
Okay.
I'm sorry. We're going to jump back for a second to Dr. Sonya. How aggressive, how long should we flush the bowel when a child is presenting ADHD type symptoms, very hyperactive behavioral issues? And I just wonder if there's any merit in explaining the difference. I worry about that word flush, right? So I just wonder if you could explain the difference between flushing the system versus breaking up all the gut, the yuck and the guck and everything that kind of gets stuck in there, because it's kind of two different things, right?
So we kind of say flushing when we use a treatment. It's called I call it the pediatric bowel clear out. The pediatric bowel clear out turns the stool to liquid so that you can actually flush out the stuff that's stuck to the gut wall. And so in this treatment, you use high dose laxatives, typically magnesium oxide, and you turn the stool to liquid, but also with the pressure of the water coming through the intestine, you're flushing through the system like you would flush a catheter. I think that's why we call it flushing. So if you look at what happens in autism, and certainly very much in Chris's practice in chronic infection and chronic health concerns, is you got a lot of junk stuck to the gut wall, just like you get junk stuck to the pipes in your home. And then if you flush through with enough pressure, you can pull a lot of it off the gut wall very safely, because the intestines are like rubber. They're very tough. They're very, it's very safe to induce diarrhea, and it's the most effective way to get rid of that junk that's in the gut. And keep in mind, the gut is what, like 8 to 15 feet long, and the small intestine has a lot of goo in it. The yeast, if we think about yeast lives in the small intestine predominantly. So if your child has a lot of yeast symptoms, where they need to be flushed is the small intestine. I pulled up another picture here by accident, but it's a great one as it relates to where the clogging happens in the gut. And this you can get from a bowel x-ray. Doctors are starting to do this. Chris, I don't know if you and I had this conversation, but doctors are starting to recommend mini bowel flushes. So they'll do like 2 or 3 days of diarrhea, where we'll recommend inducing diarrhea for up to a month, as long as the child can handle it or the adult can handle it. And as long as you're giving your child a daily electrolyte. It's a ton of diarrhea, but the behaviors just go. It's really incredible. Like I say, that we think about the gut-brain connection being somewhat abstract. It's a very physical connection. Junk in the gut makes the brain crazy. Hyperactivity, jumping, mouthing, stimming, pacing back and forth, running back and forth. That's all very much characteristic of the gut being full.
Yeah, I think I should have been a little bit clearer with what I was saying. what I wouldn't want to see a parent do is just go get a regular laxative from the drugstore or wherever, and then start using a regular laxative as opposed to the proper type of laxative that would actually break things down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, the regular laxatives are, polyethylene glycol, so they're petroleum products, and their safety is dependent on the gut being impermeable, right? So your gut is supposed to be like rubber, like no holes in it. And in autism, there's holes in it. There's gut permeability or leaky gut, if you will. So it's important to avoid sort of pharmaceutical laxatives because they will add petroleum into the system, which is a toxin.
I feel like that could have been a whole other week, just talking about leaky gut.
Yeah, I mean, I don't test for it anymore because like all the kids have it, and it takes like 18 months to 5 years to actually heal the gut. That's why the diet is so important. And the more you can sort of flush the gut, the better. But basically, this is what it kind of looks like. We recommend magnesium oxide in the morning and then magnesium oxide again later in the morning. You're trying to give a child diarrhea during the day, but they certainly can have diarrhea in the night. It's not an easy protocol at all. The only reason we recommended it is because of the significant benefit we see in kids' behavior, especially really strange, out of control behavior. I can't tell you how many times I've had parents, they've reached out to every doctor around the world, they've tried everything and everyone, they come to me and we do this and the child starts getting better. So it's a strange treatment, but if your kid has a lot of intense behaviors, try to get a bowel x-ray, and then you can do, a laxative. And then we would obviously put in the proper dose for each child, depending on the severity of constipation or fecal loading, or like the location. Sometimes the location matters.
Do you tell them about the study you did that you were in with Ontario?
Yeah, so I was asked to be part of a pilot project with the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Social Services. They had a split grant, and I was asked to treat some of the most severely, like the most aggressive children in a number of different school boards. And then Krista and I and our team went into group homes and worked with community living. And there was an 80% improvement in behaviors just with diet and treating the bowel. That wasn't even B12. That was just diet and clearing the bowel.
Yeah, we actually couldn't stay at the long-term care facility because the area had deemed the restriction in diet a human rights issue. So they said that the adults should be able to choose what they want to eat. And we were limited in what we could do because we were in Windsor, and a lot of the adults had guardians, but they had legal guardians, no actual guardians. And so going through how to actually ask for medical treatment through the guardian or through their legal guardian was almost impossible. So what we could do is diet, and we could do the clear outs because they were being done already, just the dosing was off. And so we had such an amazing response, but we didn't wind up having, like, we couldn't really pursue a lot because the diet then stopped and then the clear out stopped. Mm-hmm. But it was a great experience. We all had patients, and we all went down like every 6 months, and it was pretty amazing. But it was heartbreaking when we were apparently contravening their human rights by making them feel better. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I should just mute myself.
I had this awesome cerebral palsy patient, and I thought she was nonverbal. And because she came in with a wheelchair, and her head, she had such low tone, her head actually reached the middle of her breasts. Her head was so low, it was like that low, and she wasn't talking. And so on the second or third visit, she told me to like go F myself. And I'm like, that is amazing. I love it. And so we had a great relationship, but I didn't know she could talk, but with the interventions, she got more power. She walked in, and then
yeah, I was gonna say, I remember that because she had walked in. Yeah.
I guess the walk-in was probably more key, but yeah, she was awesome.
The severity of behaviors that we've seen now and approached it with the bowel clearing is just, it's staggering. Like, I mean, really, I had a kid, and everything went in the toilet or everything went in the pool. destroying the house, hurting himself, hurting other people, smashing his face on the ground, just like completely berserk. And they did a bowel x-ray, they did a laxative, but they had followed the directions of their physician. And so I didn't hear from them for 6 months, and they called me and they're like, all the behaviors are gone. What's next? So like I would have done it faster, but it was really, I mean, if I could stay awake, I can tell you these stories for literally days. It's exciting. I think behavior in many cases is highly medical. And then once you clear that, kids just improve so much more in their therapies, in their learning, in their social interaction, in their communication. And like I said, to circle back to that whole piece about praxis, it's giving kids control over their bodies, which I think is the human right, if we're going to talk about that piece. But
yeah, and you know, just being cognizant of time, while we have Dr. Carissa here, you know, going back to what you were saying about cortisol, and how sleep affects cortisol.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could speak to that quick, because I know some of the families that are on here right now, and I think that they could really use to hear about that, because I think a lot of people don't appreciate. People say to me all the time, Robin, how are you doing this? Like, how are you raising 2 autistic kids? One of them is severe, one may as well be severe. She's just very, very highly verbal, and running a business at the same time. And the answer is, I have Dr. Carissa and sleep.
I think the piece for sleep is that some people are having let's go back. The adrenal glands or the stress system, they're 2 organ systems that are above the kidney. They have nothing to do with kidney function. They are hormone or endocrine glands. And there's an inner part and an outer part. One of the part will produce adrenaline and epinephrine and like fight or flight, go, 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 go. That's the gear you don't want to be in all the time. You would like it to be your choice. For you guys, it is not. You guys are in fight or flight almost all the time. But the normal gear for life is cortisol. You wake up with cortisol, that gives you a lift out of bed. You actually technically get a second little hit in the afternoon to get you through the day, and then cortisol goes down so you can initiate and maintain sleep. So stress and in sleep are an interplay of adrenaline and cortisol. And because they're made in the same area, and they kind of are both technically stimulating, we sometimes look at our impact on actually feeling stress, and we say, hey, we have high cortisol. Sometimes you do, but high cortisol is treated very differently than high adrenaline. So usually what we do is we do a little shutdown test where we say, you know what, if we do testing, which I love obviously, but if we do testing for adrenaline and testing for cortisol, it's not going to tell me who's driving your bus. It's not going to tell me who's in charge of your biochemistry, because dose doesn't matter. If you have low amounts of both, well, who's in charge? So for that purpose, we give valerian, and we call it a shutdown protocol. So valerian is what we call an anxiolytic herb because it modifies adrenaline or fight or flight. It doesn't actually modify cortisol. So cortisol is supposed to be good for you. It's your daily daytime energy guy. It's not supposed to be secreted in the night, but it is the daytime default. If you're sliding the minute you wake up into fight or flight, that's burnout. That is the classic definition of I'm burning out. I'm burning the candle at 2 ends because I'm living on fight or flight, adrenaline and cortisol, and both of them are depleting. And fight or flight will always win. If you're in trouble, adrenaline will slide into the bus and drive you. So modifying that and slowing it down and pumping the brake and kicking it out of the driver's seat can be done safely with adrenaline or with valerian. So Sonya and I were driving in the car one day and we're like, let's try to see if valerian is sedating, because it's famous for being a sleep aid. So is it sedating? Sonya was driving and I just, like, over the course of an hour, maybe I ate the whole bottle, like 2 or 3. Remember that?
yeah.
Yeah. So we just needed to know, like, is it sedating? Because it's not supposed to be sedating. And, I didn't want to be driving heavy machinery or anything. It's not, it's not supposed to be, but it didn't have an effect on me. I wasn't being driven by flight or flight on that day. So it had no impact on me at all. Usually what happens if people are getting impacted by fight or flight is it will make them feel calmer or tired, because without fight or flight and your cortisol is probably bottomed out, you're going to feel that lack of something that pushes you. So when we support stress in people, We do both, teasingly called uppers and downers. We downregulate the adrenaline, or we block the adrenaline, or we deal with it somehow. B12 cuts it up, and magnesium cuts it up, and valerian stops it from flooding into your system or your biochemistry. And then we support cortisol. We give you adaptogens, B vitamins, vitamin C, to support good cortisol in the morning and let it kind of get under control, down regulated in the afternoon. So that, I think all parents have to be on those. I know it's like a lot, but you guys are getting burnt out, and it's just, post-traumatic stress is real, and this system has a finite shelf life. So if you can support it on a constant basis, it may help you regenerate with sleep. So adrenaline will interfere with sleep. If you have those smart little Fitbits, it will just tell me how inactive I am, so I don't do one. But if you wear it at night, it will tell you how much alert time you're in, and that's how much adrenaline you're pumping in while you're supposed to be sleeping. And valerian will cut that down. So we sort of suggest valerian for downregulating the adrenaline, B vitamins, vitamin C, just for fuel for the adrenal glands, because it's like a coal burning fire, or like you need to put coal in or wood in all the time. That's B vitamins, vitamin C. And adaptogens, or herbs that support or give you energy without a tax to them, are things like ginseng, rhodiola, holy basil, ashwagandha. Those are nice. I kind of teasingly call them uppers, but they don't have any harm or risk or habit forming nature to them. Neither does valerian. So I think all the parents have to be on a modified version of like all of that, just because you're gassing and braking your car at the same time. There's no way it can't have wear and tear on you.
My mentor ended up with breast cancer, and she wrote a book both about autism, healing our autistic children, and breast cancer, where to start. Her name's Julie Buckley, and she said, like, if you're working with families, you have to talk about parent care. Like it is an absolute, because the stress system is so overwhelmed, and you guys know this, but when they looked at the PTSD, the only group that came close to soldiers were parents of kids with special needs.
A question for Dr. Kursa. Can you expand on the valerian protocol, dosage, etc.?
Oh yeah, sure. So we usually typically recommend like a high dose valerian. I think New Roots has one that's fine. And then we like MediHerb because it's like a professional brand, like high-end aggressive company. So we typically, for a shutdown protocol, which is, hey, is this actually you? Because you can't test for this idea. You can just do a short-term, hey, it is me, is you take 2 to 3 tablets of valerian at least 2 times a day for 10 days to 14 days and see how you feel. If you feel nothing, then your adrenaline is behaving properly. If you feel anything, you're probably stuck in the wrong gear, and your adrenaline is just jumping in and trying to help you survive. And it's better if it doesn't do that, but it's better if you're in the driver's seat. So that's all the valerian?
That's the valerian that I use.
By the tubful. That's the company you use for valerian.
Yepers. I like the liquid. So what would you do for liquid?
I like the liquid too. I mean, we always have it in the clinic for you.
So my son takes it too. He's unfortunately, it's been a stressful year for kids, right? And a couple of years with pandemic, and he started to have insomnia, and both of us, my husband and I, have a history of insomnia. So he takes it before bed. I give it to him in a little shot glass, and he takes it, goes to bed. It works amazing.
I think the liquid is always better, but it's so expensive when you get like a big bottle of botanical and it's like $100 to $200. People are like, $200 for a botanical, whereas a bottle is expensive, but it seems like it'll last you. Well, even a bottle on the shutdown protocol will only last you 14 days, no matter how big the bottle is. So
yeah, I think the price, I'm not sure how different the price is at the dosing you'd use. But the valerian, it's like probably the grossest thing you'll smell or taste. But
it smells like garbage. I've had a couple of people at this point say that they threw it out by accident because they thought it had gone off. I'm like, no,
amazing.
It smells like garbage, but it doesn't taste
like
garbage.
It smells like sleep to me.
It smells like sweet garbage, sweet sleepy garbage.
It smells like sleep to me. Yeah.
So I can't imagine you guys all on the call would not benefit from valerian. So if I was going to say one thing about your stress system, I would say take the adrenaline off of it because it's so corrosive. This is how in my mind, adrenaline is always like that 40-year-old like corporate guy who's walking around his office, type A, and then he like has a heart attack. That's adrenaline. And I think the female piece and the family piece that protects us a little bit, but the adrenaline is really hard on the body. Really hard.
All right.
Okay.
We're at 9:00, so
Yeah. Any last questions? Yeah, I'm really grateful for all of this. I just, it's always a nice refresher for me, but I mean, I talk about it a lot. I think parents think I'm a little bit crazy when I'm telling them you need to stop all the food, and they're looking at me like, what do you mean? I'm like, they're not going to starve. I promise you, they will eat. They're going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Question, should probiotics be taken after or during a colon cleanse to help with the microbiome?
well, I think the ship has somewhat sailed once there's stuff stuck to the gut wall. Like the analogy that I always give is one of a garden. Like if the gut is like a garden and you've got stuff all over the garden bed, like gravel and mud and tar and garbage, you got to flush it out, but then you also have to heal the gut and turn the soil. So you have to do that with fish oil. Fish oil actually heals the gut tissue, and so does the vitamin A in the cod liver oil. It heals the enterocytes, which are the gut cells. So before we even start planting, which is the good bacteria or the probiotics, we need to really get the soil or the gut tissue ready.
So you can do probiotics, but we worried about it clogging up the gut too.
Well, it's you're going to war with microbes that when it's stuck to the gut wall, they're winning. So once you flush it out and there's nowhere for them to hide, that's when you should go after them, either with herbs or with probiotics or both.
I really thought I had a handle on all of these things until we started doing some testing. And then I realized how much I didn't know, because I had been picking up bits and pieces and Ted had been picking up bits and pieces, and we thought we had it all worked out. And then we did some testing and then we realized we really knew nothing. And all those, I think some of the diagrams that you showed make a lot of sense if you know what you're looking at. Right? So I found them to be very overwhelming, and still do. My husband will sit there and decipher every single piece of it, but not me. So if that's you, they can definitely help you to do that. I'm not the one to do that, just for the record. But definitely Dr. Sonya or Dr. Carissa can both help you with your own issues or your child's issues, for sure.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Robin, for having us. This was amazing. It was lovely to get to see you for a few weeks in a row here, and I wish you guys all the best. And yeah, that's let me know if you want me to pass on any of the resources that we showed during the talk.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely will. And Carissa, I'll be talking to you shortly.
Thank you, Robin.
Take care. Bye, everyone. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.